Hello, this is Diego, and in this occasion, I'm presenting to you my favorite book, which happens to be How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I know what you're thinking, and don't come for me. I know this is a child's book, I'm aware of that, but I think that's precisely why I like it so much. It's a story that reminds me a lot of my childhood, and even to this day, I'm still watching the movies and reading the story during this season. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Here you can see the table of contents. We're going to be talking about the author, the characters, internal background, and a little plot diagram, the literary elements, why it is my favorite book, and at the end you'll find the sources that I used to create this presentation. Let's talk about the author. Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known by his pen name Dr. Seuss, was a writer and cartoonist, and actually, the illustrations you'll be seeing throughout these presentations are extracted from the book and were made by Seuss himself. He published over 60 books in his life, and many of them are now movies. Geisel was born on March the 2nd, 1904 in Springfield, Massachusetts. At age 18, he became the editor-in-chief of his university's humor magazine, Jack-O-Lantern. And after graduating from Dartmouth University, Geisel attended the University of Oxford, but dropped out in 1927. Wrote his book we're talking about when he was 53 years old, never had kids, and sadly, Seuss died in 1991 in La Jolla, California. I don't write for children, I write for people. Once a writer starts talking down to kids, he's lost. Kids can pick up on that kind of thing. Dr. Seuss. And now, you can see that I'm not that crazy for liking this book after all. Now let's get a little bit deeper. The protagonist of the story is the Grinch himself. Because although he starts out as a clear villain, he undergoes a process of redemption. The antagonist of the story is therefore also the Grinch, because he comes to understand that his distaste for the Who's and the Christmas season springs from a problem within himself that must be changed in order for him to stop being a mean one, Mr. Grinch. Then we have Max, who is the dog and companion of the Grinch, and we can't exactly tell his breed. And finally, we have Cindy Lou Who, a young girl from Whoville. Moving on, I would like to think that you already know, or at least you are familiarized with the story. But if not, here we have a plot diagram to make it a little bit more visual for you. In the next slides, we'll get a little deeper on these aspects. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch, who lived just north of Whoville, did not. Now, this is quite self-explanatory. A town of Merry Christmas lovers called the Who's goes about their annual holiday preparations on Christmas Eve, and up in the caves of the mountain Crumpet lives a character named the Grinch who absolutely hates Christmas. And we're not sure why, but we're going to discover it. Then he got an idea. An awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea. At any rate, the Grinch has had enough of this Christmas thingy and he sets about trying to ruin it for the Who's. I know just what to do. The Grinch laughed in his throat, and he made a quick Santa Claus hat and a coat. And he chuckled and clucked, "What a great Grinchy trick! With this coat and this hat, I look just like Saint Nick." Dressed up as St. Nicholas along with his dog Max, disguised as a reindeer, he decided he would sneak into the Who's houses and steal everything so Christmas couldn't come to town this year. Then he slithered and slunk with a smile most unpleasant around the whole room and took every present. Pop guns and bicycles, roller skates, drums, checkerboards, tricycles, popcorn and plums. And he stuffed them in bags. Then the Grinch very nimbly stuffed all the bags one by one up the chimney. While robbing the Who's houses, the Grinch was discovered by a little girl, Cindy Lou Who. At this point, we would think that he would be discovered, but cleverly enough, fools the girl and sends her back to bed. Once our main character had packed up all their presents, the ribbons, the wrappings, the tags and the tinsel, the trimmings, the trappings, went 3,000 feet up the side of Mountain Crumpet. He rode with his load to the tip-top to dump it. When he was about to dump all the presents, he heard a noise, but it wasn't a sad noise. It sounded merry. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing, without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming, it came. It's in this point when the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. And what happened then? Well, in Whoville they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. The minute his heart didn't feel quite so tight, he whizzed with his load through the bright morning light. And he brought back the toys and the food and the feast, and he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast beast. As a resolution, we can say that the Grinch learned what the true meaning of Christmas was. In that moment, the Grinch changes his mind and his heart when it comes to Christmas. He winds up redeeming himself by returning all the gifts and even joining in the festivities. Now that you know what the story is about, let's talk about the language and style. The story is narrated from a third-person perspective, but tells the story from the Grinch's point of view. As you could tell in the previous slides, the whole story is written in rhymed verse, more precisely in couplets, which are 2 rhyming lines of verse that fall in succession one after another. Also, we can find throughout the story many examples of episexes. This is in rhetoric the repetition of a word, whether for vehemence or to make emphasis. The mood of the story is fairly lighthearted, and this is interesting because despite we are reading about a green creature sneaking into people's houses, stealing everything in his way, Dr. Zoids accomplishes not to make it disturbing, but funny and entertaining at the same time. Now moving on to symbols, allegory, and motifs, we have the Grinch, who represents people who are unwilling to join the society and act respectfully due to ignorance or bitterness. The Grinch isolates himself due to his ignorance about the Who's and his hatred of Christmas, but he later learns the true meaning of Christmas and the importance of being part of a community. Secondly, we have the Grinch's suit. As the Grinch carries out his debut scheme to destroy Christmas, if you can remember, he wears a Santa Claus suit. He does this ironically at first, but later this becomes an embodiment of Santa Claus himself when he returns the children their presents. And the third one are the Who's. They represent a sense of community and inclusion from which the Grinch is excluded from. With their love for Christmas and warmth towards each other, the Who's represented the hopeful potential for people to live happily together with a shared communal spirit. And finally, and this is my favorite one, in the book, Mountain Crumpet doesn't just function as a place, it's also the apex of the story. It is here, on this peak, at the highest of heights, that the Grinch is torn between two sides, and we'll see that. When the structure of a story is drawn out on a whiteboard, as you can see on your screen, the climax is often depicted as a peak of a very steep, triangular mountain. In How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the climax of the story actually happens while the main character is at the peak of a very steep, triangular mountain. This is genius to me. In the illustrations, Mountain Crumpet is depicted as a comically steep and snow-covered mountain with just a few trees at the base, and at the very top, it ends suddenly in a cliff that drops precipitously, which is where the Grinch plans to push off all of the Who's Christmas goodies. Mountain Crumpet represents struggle, and it represents real change for the Grinch. And if you don't believe me, remember, then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from his door. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. Now, why is it my favorite book? Well, in case you haven't noticed, Christmas is my favorite season. It actually is the season for me. And getting a little bit cheesier, it reminds me a lot of my childhood, as I mentioned in the introduction to this presentation. I've watched the movies every Christmas season since I have memory. Then in junior high school, I decided to read a book, and I fell more in love with it. Despite my poor English at the time. Thirdly, and this is a point I'm not going to discuss, the genius rhyming. That's it. The genius rhyming. Another point, well, the character is that iconic, it even turned into an adjective or a noun depending on the situation. And the Cambridge Dictionary defines Grinch as a person who doesn't like other people celebrating or enjoying themselves, especially a person who doesn't like Christmas. Finally, it's my favorite book because it has relevance in our times. And, well, we all have stumbled across a Grinch in our lives, right? There are people who live to be party poopers because being a Grinch sometimes it's not only about Christmas, but about life in general. And I think that's it. If you made it to this point, thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you had found this interesting. And also, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. I know it's December 1st, but hey, you never know. Finally, there you have my sources in case you would like to go deeper into this story. And thank you. As for the activity, you can find a link to it in the description of this video. Bye.